Hi, friends. Welcome back to The Whole Way Home. Today's episode is one of the most sacred I've shared so far. I'm so excited to welcome my guest, someone very close to my heart. Lise is my mother-in-law, but more than that, she's been a spiritual mother and a steady encourager in my walk with God. Her faith is quiet, unwavering, and deeply rooted, the kind of faith that doesn't just speak, it lives. I'm honored to sit down with her today to share a powerful and personal testimony, a story of adoption, surrender, spiritual motherhood, and God's miraculous timing. As a young woman, Lise placed 2 children for adoption, each to a different family, through a Catholic agency. She didn't know how the story would unfold, but she trusted the author. What followed was a long, tender walk with the Lord through seasons of surrender, restoration, and unshakable hope. There were years of trusting God in the unseen, clinging to His goodness without knowing how it would all come together, and now, by His mercy, each piece has found its way home. This is a story of reunion, of redemption, and of a woman who said yes to God, even when it cost everything, and was met with more grace than she ever could have imagined. Let's get into it. Lise, I just want to start by saying thank you again for being willing to share this part of your story. I know it holds so much weight and beauty.
I'm so glad to. Very glad to be here with you.
Would you be open to taking us back to that time in your life? What your world looked like, what you were facing, and how you came to the decision of adoption?
Yeah, I'll take you back. I had a happy childhood with a family of 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls. I was number 4, wedged in between all that, and a beautiful, wonderful, sweet mom. But when I was a little girl at 5 years old, my mother was pregnant for the 7th time and getting ready to have a little baby who they were going to name Haley Louise. And she went into labor early, about 2 months early. Haley Louise died after 10 hours. And because of the dynamic of my family and having had all these siblings, it was always a celebration, and always children were always, a cause for celebration. And the death of a child was a cause for great sadness. And I saw that in my mom, and she rebounded quickly because I think she didn't have any other choice with 6 kids in the house, and dealt with things later. Anyway, I think that marked me, that great sorrow of a child dying, and probably one of the challenges that kind of set my path in a direction that I was maybe less directed was my father and I. It was around the age of 10, I think, that I kind of figured out that he just didn't like me. I was, uh, I don't know, I was outgoing, and my mom said I was her easiest child, but I was fun loving and I guess a bit of a nonconformist, sort of a free spirit. And dad liked his ducks in a row. And he was a World War II veteran and had come through a lot of hard things with the Great Depression and other things. And so there wasn't room for being a character I think, in his world. And he must have sort of looked at that, like, looked at me and thought, oh, I don't know about this one. But at any rate, that's sort of his lack of love and affirmation turned into an uglier side of a lot of meanness, sarcasm, name calling, and, sometimes physical abuse. And so I would say that without my knowing it, of course, I was completely unaware of the fact that had affected my heart so greatly. But I was looking for affirmation wherever I could, get it. Between the ages of 10 and 14 with him was the worst of it. So at any rate, I am at 15 years old. I met a guy at a park with a friend of mine playing frisbee, and we started dating. And he gave me a lot of affirmation, a lot of attention, made me feel really good about myself. I was probably looking for love and fell for infatuation. and did not realize the difference between the two, certainly. Anyway, he gave me a promise ring and was wanting to marry me after we got out of high school. And I say sometimes the promise ring was long on ring and short on promise, because
Mhm.
we ended up, he ended up becoming quite a bit like my father towards
Mm.
me, and was in fact, it was a very tumultuous relationship. So there was a lot going on there that was very scary and challenging. And anyway, I ended up pregnant. I got pregnant a month before my 17th birthday, and very scared to tell mom and dad. But my dad ended up figuring it out when I was wearing overalls all the time and my little belly showed. And uh, anyway, that was just, it was a very challenging time. I was scared, but mom and dad, they did the best that they could. But honestly, they were sad, they were mad, they were disappointed, and they really just did not know how to talk to me. So basically, I stayed downstairs after I dropped out of high school. They talked the staff at the school I went to into bringing my things home or sending them home, and so I got to finish high school and actually graduate with my class. But I did my work at home and basically sat downstairs by myself most of the time of my pregnancy. The wonderful thing that happened was that because they did not know how to talk to me or what to do about me, they sent me to a counselor, and that was life changing. I was able to actually share my fears, all the overwhelming pressures that I was feeling, and she and I really got to talk about all of it, and she helped guide me to find out what did I really want to do. Well, mom and dad had already told me that I would be out of the house if I decided to keep that baby, because I'd made my own decisions and I was going to have to take responsibility for that. And you're out if that's what you decide. And I had already had to quit my job. So I had no job and 17 years old, and I had no wherewithal to try to figure that out. And in my world, just abortion was not an option for me. I know a lot of people have had the pain and the trauma and the challenges and the pressures that have led them down that path, and I feel for them, and I know God is a redeemer of our lives and our choices. That's all I know. But that was not an option for me. And so the thing is, as soon as I knew that I was pregnant, I knew that little baby was a part of me, and I loved it. I loved that baby. And all I knew was I wanted what was best for him or her. And as I began talking about it with her, we did end up talking about adoption. And it was a completely foreign concept to me. But one thing that I learned was that I could choose the family from a number of home studies, which is exactly what I ended up doing. I just thought, I don't want my baby to be in daycare all the time and somebody else raising him. I don't want to, I had felt sort of like I didn't have a father in many ways. And so thinking about my baby not having a father didn't seem right to me. And I know people do it all the time, but in my little childlike mind, I guess, very young mind, I thought, I don't want my baby to have that situation if I could do something different. And so I did, in fact, pick the family that my son went to. And what I was looking for, I don't know. I looked for someone who was kind, and they seemed strong and had a lot of energy, and really desperately longing for a baby, a child to call their own. They already had one child, and they were told they couldn't have any more children. And they also had a strong faith in God. And growing up in a denomination that, definitely faith was playing a part in my life. Um, I didn't know God very well, didn't understand him very well, but what I did know is that I wanted my baby to have that as an anchor in his life or her life. And so I chose this family. And one of the other good thing that this counselor did for me is we talked more than just about a decision. We walked down the road and what that would look like the day at the hospital, and what would that be, what would you be feeling and thinking about afterwards, and how to deal with those things. And so when I did get to the hospital and I ended up giving birth and to a son, I ended up being prepared for that day as much as you possibly can be. Of course, I was sad and, crying and trying to cry softly because the day I was going to leave the hospital, the nurse said to me, "Would you like to hold your baby?" I didn't even know that that was a possibility. Um, the agency that we went through, Catholic Charities, had not mentioned any of that. And I hadn't actually thought or talked to my counselor about that. And so when that happened, it was a surprise, but they sort of stuck me in this dark little room that was quiet. There was somebody's little office, I think, that wasn't used. And they handed me my little son. And so I got to hold him and look at him, and he was so beautiful. And I was trying to cry softly just so I didn't scare him. And all I could think is I just cried out to God because, I didn't have anything else to offer him except this choice that I believed would give him the best life. And so I just said, God, please just give him the best life. Just let him feel surrounded by your love, a family that just makes him feel so beloved and eventually a wife and children. And I just pray that he would never feel sad or any void or abandonment about his adoption, but he'd just always feel this sense of belonging and being loved. So I left the hospital after that, and that was very challenging. But I'm 17, and I got thrust right back into school. I finished school. I got to graduate high school, and I honestly looked at it like a chapter that I closed, like something that was so very hard, but I had no grid for processing it further than that. And I'd been thankful for the process I got with the counselor. But about so I did finish high school. I went to college, and one thing that had happened to me also when I was young was at 12 years old, I'm sitting in a window nook at my house, and I was watching snow come down, and I was sitting at the window, and I saw the snowflakes hitting the window, and one after another, my attention was so drawn and fixed on these snowflakes, and I realized that each one of them was different from the one before. And that night I had an encounter with God. And all I knew was my mind all of a sudden was wrapped around the truth that God existed, that He designed the earth, and that I mattered to Him. I didn't know how much, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know Him well, but I knew the story of Jesus, and I knew that maybe it was like He was sort of like a great grandfather in the sky to me, as far as what you would know about Him. So, and that was important in my story, I think, because I think in the back of my mind, there was always these questions about what was life about and what were the bigger truths about purpose and eternity and things that these were always going off in the back of my mind. Well, at 3 years after I gave my son up for adoption, almost three, I had met a guy, and we fell in love, and he was the one that ended up sending me. He moved out of town, moved back in with his family who had just moved to Arkansas and was working for them. So we were having this long distance relationship, but he sent me a little tract that told me about Jesus, told me the story of the gospel, that Jesus actually loved me so much that he was willing to die for me, to win me back to righteous standing with the Father, that we've all sinned and come short of that glory of God, and that Jesus was willing to bridge that gap between me and God. And this track also said, somebody's on the throne of your heart today, and right now it's probably you. And God would love to have that place to lead and guide your life into every beautiful thing that He's got planned for you and His purposes, which He really has for your life. I'd never heard that God had a purpose for my life or plans for my life. And that just sent me into 4 months of just over the top, feeling like I was incredibly loved and so joyous and crying and laughing and just upside down and over the moon about this God, because He was also a father. And I had really longed for a father in my life. And so He really took that place. And I was very much of a child in my thinking and understanding of him, but I was growing in that. And anyway, this guy that had told me about that, we did fall in love. We got engaged, and I had moved all my things down to Arkansas in preparation for our marriage, and we had sort of made this agreement that we weren't going to have sex until we got married. Thought that was best, and one night we broke that agreement, and anyway, we both were like, oh my gosh, this is not the direction we wanted to take this. But about 4 weeks later, he came back up to Kansas City because he came back and forth, and we missed each other horribly. Um, and he broke up with me, and he said, and he had told me the year before that he thought his whole life is that God had showed him that he was going to marry some blonde, blue-eyed girl, never saw her face, but that God had already sort of set things up, and so he expected that, but then he fell in love with me. And he said, I just ignored that little voice that said that. And he cried and cried. We both cried through this. Um, and then he left. And about a week later, I found out I was pregnant. So, yeah. And I was alone again, and very, very much challenged in this. And I had made up my mind there's no way I could give another baby up for adoption. I was older now. I'm 20 years old. I can, make this happen. And so made plans. Just I'm going to work. I'm going to, do all these things, and that I need to do to take care of this little baby. And they had a shower for me. A friend did, and um, the little bit that I did know about God, one thing that I did recognize is that He leads you through peace. There's a scripture in Psalms that talks about how He leads you by the still waters. And my waters in my belly were not calm. They were not peaceful. I couldn't get any peace. And all those reasons that I had made that choice for my son. You're alone. You don't have a father for the baby. You're going to be working 24/7 to raise a baby, and he's going to be mostly in daycare, he or she. And you're going to get weekends and some nights with your baby. And all of that I just didn't see how to do that. And maybe other people do it with the support, but I did not have that support of my family. And so at any rate, these things come flooding back, and I realized that adoption it felt like the right answer. And as soon as I thought it, all the peace flooded my being, all the peace that this is the right answer, no matter what I felt about it. I didn't want to. That wasn't what my heart wanted, I felt like, but it's what I felt was the right thing. And I love this baby just like I'd love my other one. And so 2 months before I had my baby, I made the choice to give them up for adoption. And I went through somebody at my church that was an attorney, and he knew a ministry couple in Florida that he felt that would be a great placement for the baby. So once again, I find myself in the hospital. And this time I got to hold my baby several times, and I had a little girl. And my mom got to hold her. My mom came in, and, she said, she just looks just like you when you were born. And I got to hold her. She did too, stroked her hair, held her up on my shoulder. And when I was by myself, I found myself praying that same kind of prayer. Lord, please just give her the best life. Just let her feel so absolutely surrounded by love and feel so secure in that, and just never have any void or sadness or sorrow about it. And I ended up choosing to come out of the hospital, and my little girl went to her family. And so that was my adoption stories. And afterwards, you asked me before, how did I feel and what was that like? And I can only say at that point, I felt used up. Like I I don't know what I have left, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Lise. I know you just carried us through so many chapters of heartbreak and surrender, and it means a lot that you didn't hold anything back. You mentioned feeling used up, and I think a lot of women listening can relate to that moment, the ache of giving your all yet still feeling empty. But you also had this quiet thread of faith woven through it all. What did it look like to start rebuilding from there, not just practically, but in your spirit? Was there a turning point where the sense of being used up started to shift?
Yeah, I did. It was a growing thing, and the thing that I think is sometimes I don't know. I wished that you could microwave um, feeling whole again,
Mm,
and knowing God, that it would just go. It would all just come at once, like a major upload from your heart, where He I knew was living. Um, but I will say this: as much as my emotions were all over the map at that time, and some other things happened where I had an ex-boyfriend that was stalking me, and there was a lot that happened there, but it was a very challenging situation. So I had that going on at the same time. He'd broken into my house and threatened me. And anyway, so I ended up having to move out of town at just that same year. So my faith was challenged in every way, as far as my emotions.
yeah.
But the truth was that you can't. It's not an understanding that God is real. He is real. He was not my great grandfather in the sky. I knew that he loved me enough to die for me. And I knew that he had saved my life. And I knew that he was doing things greater than what I knew behind the scenes, no matter what I could see. And that held my heart. That kind of presence that I couldn't, as much as my emotions would take over sometimes, his presence would continue to bring me back to that I was loved. And unfortunately, the place where I went to live in Breckenridge, Colorado, wasn't really a great community space, and a lot of transient people coming and going, because it's a very much of a place where people go and just vacation and all. So I didn't make a lot of good friends, and I couldn't find a good church, and so I was very much on my own for a while there. But God did sustain me, because I knew He was real, and He wasn't a concept to me. He was a living, breathing being that loved me completely.
That is so powerful, Lise. Since you didn't have a church or a strong community around you at that time, what helped you stay tethered to God in that season? What anchored your heart to Him when everything else felt so uncertain?
Yeah, it was the Bible, the Word of God. I found such an intense and amazing love of the Word of God through that time. And the more you know about the Word of God, the more you know it's not words on a page that are just heartfelt or make you feel warm or good or just give you a high or emotion. They're actually, it says that they're life and health to our body. They are their wholeness. They're a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. They're living and active and sharper than a two-edged sword, dividing between your soul, which is that emotional place, and your spirit. And so reading them would bring me into a place of communion with God again, and separated out those emotional feelings. And I learned eventually, emotions are never a perfect indicator of truth.
Mm. Hmm.
And honestly, they're fair weather friends,
Yep.
because you may attach a feeling to a song that you heard, or something that happened to you in your life, and start spiraling off. But it those things aren't your ultimate reality. Your ultimate reality is that you are being upheld by a power greater than yourself. And and your emotions are not going to be the indicator of that, but knowing him and having faith in him. That is the ultimate truth in my life, and I found that out through very, very hard knocks. Yeah.
Yes, you've definitely walked through a lot. Abuse, hardship, loss, as many women have,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
many of them feel very alone. So it's amazing to know that there's a resource, the Bible, that has words in it that, I mean, from your story, clearly cut through, what the enemy is deceiving you with. Um,
Yeah.
so it's been such a resource for me as well. It's been my armor, my ammo against the enemy, and my just everything in the redemption of all the bad things that have happened to me. It's been such a resource. So thank you for bringing
Mhm.
that up. I'm
Of course.
glad we get to talk about that. And then, so God wrote something only He could write. Can we start to talk about the reunion with your children?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, um, it's so interesting to me too. I'll say this. Romans 8:28 says that God will use even the bad things that happen in our life, not cause them, but he will use even the hard things, the ashes of our life, and bring beauty in those places. And he will use it to work together for good and for his purposes. So I think back now, I've had the hindsight of many years. And one thing that I recognize that I might not have been able to see at the time is because the breakup with my fiance when I was 20 was so very, very hard and disillusioning because he's the person that introduced me to Jesus as well. And saying goodbye to him and that future that I had imagined was very challenging. And so, but I look at that now and I think if I would not have met him and connected with him, I would not have connected with Jesus
Mm,
and the life that I knew and the life that became my life, my anchor, my way, my truth. And the other one, the other challenging one from high school that was harsh and very hard, very traumatic in many ways. My ex called me in 1999, and you could look at that and just say, "Oh my gosh, we don't want to have go there or have anything to do." But he said, "I wondered whether you had ever found our son." And I said, "What? No, I never even thought of that ever." And he said, "Well, I'm doing well now. My life is on track. I've got, I've earned a good amount of money, and I wondered if he ever would need any help or anything like that." And so I said, "Well, I don't know. I've got, teens. I can't imagine. I never told them. Um, it was a closed door, chapters that were closed in my life that I dealt with the best way that I knew how, and I thought that was the end of it." And I never, never thought to tell them. And in this generation, that may sound weird because everybody tells everybody all the things. But in my generation, that was not the case. And we kind of, just kept things that were private and hard and tucked them away and said, okay, life goes on and we're going to keep on going. And so, but at any rate, that planted a seed. I got off the phone with him and I said, well, I don't know. Whatever you want to do, you can, but I don't know that I want to do that. And I kept thinking about it. So he planted a seed and that grew, and I couldn't let it go then. And I asked my husband how he felt about that. And he said, I, um, I think it's amazing. I think that would be wonderful for you to reconnect. And I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah. And he says, and I just want to let you know that no matter what, the situation is with your son, if, I mean, we will handle that. If, I mean, he could be in trouble or on drugs. And I just started laughing. And I said, what are you talking about? My son is great. I know that. I know he is great. And in my heart and mind, with the light that I had at that time at 17, what I knew about God, I sort of felt like I placed this most precious of treasures, this beautiful baby. and then ultimately my baby girl, into this sort of ball of light, I guess you'd call it, because all I could see about God was that there was no darkness in him and he was only light. And I had placed them right there in the center of his goodness, and that he was taking care of them when I couldn't, and through their parents and through their life. And I prayed for them many, many times over the years. So I just laughed because I thought that's absurd. I'm sure he's doing wonderful. At any rate, I wrote a letter to his parents. I thought that would be most appropriate. Just, go directly to them because they were his parents and I wasn't. And I didn't feel any sense of rights or anything to assert myself. I just wanted to introduce myself and see if they had any interest in meeting. And so I sent that letter off through the Catholic Social Services, and they actually were sending a letter back. But then the department said, "Could we? The parents would like to know, can they call you?" And I was like, "Well, sure." And so I said yes. And then I get this phone call from this absolutely bubbly, energetic, warm, sweet woman and her husband, Lorraine and Gary. And she said, "Oh, I'm so glad that you wrote to us. We had always hoped that when Kevin was raised, that you would come back and he would get to know you somehow and connect with him. And I have told him his whole life that you loved him, and that he had another mother out there that loved him very much, and that's why she gave him up for adoption, was that he could have the best chance at life." And I can't even describe or put into words what was going on in my mind and heart. I think I was a little bit in shock because I had not expected whatsoever. I just had no expectations, and this overwhelming display of hearing that this woman had told him his whole life that he was loved, and actually expressed exactly my thoughts and my feelings towards him, which is, I will love him so much, I will do whatever it takes for him to have the best life. I was astounded that she had told him that. And I honestly, she started telling me all kinds of details about his life, and I was still stuck back at her saying his name was Kevin. Hearing his name for the first time. But she told me he was a straight A student his whole life, and that he'd been the best son and never raised his voice to them. And he'd always been a wonderful boy, and just, one great detail after another. And she actually went up to a printing place and zipped off pictures for me and sent them. And I think I got them a day or two later. And I started seeing pictures of my son. And she said, "I wanted you to be able to see him." So that started the
Mm,
ball rolling.
such a miracle.
Such a miracle. And about a month later, I got a letter from him. It was a 4-page letter, and it was absolutely, absolutely beautiful, full of details about his life, and just how he met his wife. And they knew right away when they were in high school, as they were in their junior, senior year, they fell in love. And so he ended up telling me that he had already 2 children, and one on the way. And so I was instantly a grandma.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a shock and exciting and amazing. Uh, another shock, I guess, and something that just profoundly affected me, was that in his letter, and I'd love to just read this little excerpt from it if you want to hear it.
Yeah, of course.
But after, what I prayed for him in the hospital, and here's one of the things that he said. He said, "I would like to say thank you to you and my birth father, who had the courage to give your son the best possible chance for a great life. I would imagine some people who are given up for adoption might feel abandoned, or might think they were given up because they were not loved. I have never felt this way. And I think it's because my parents always told me that they didn't know your story, but what they did know was that giving me up for adoption was not a lack of love, but an act of true selfless love, where you were doing the best thing for me. I believed this all along, and I do so even more now." I trust that everything will work out, and I know everything will happen according to God's plans. He also wrote in his letter, so my very prayer was exactly what he experienced. He never felt any sadness, any lack of love, any void or sense of abandonment. And he also wrote that his adoption gave him the courage to do hard things in life because his birth mother had done hard things for him. So it
Wow.
was really profound. Yeah, very, very amazing. So we got to meet in December of that year of 2000, and it was amazing. I took flowers for him and his wife, and got to meet their little daughter Sammy and Jake, their little boy. And then April was pregnant, and we're hugging. And I don't know. Of course, my emotions were on overload, and I didn't know how to react, but I wished I could have pressed the pause button. Here we were all at his house, and then we're going to go to dinner, and we did. We went to this restaurant. I'm I'm trying to I'm trying to look at him and pay attention to just stare at him, and I wish I could press the pause button. They're wanting to know whether I wanted chicken or fish, or French fries or salad. And I'm like, this just doesn't compute. It was so, yeah, it was a very overload, beautiful, amazing, incredible, wild moment, and wild, beautiful night. And before I left that night, his mother kind of held my shoulders and looked me in the eye, and she says, I just want you to know you have no idea what your sacrifice has meant to our lives. And I cannot tell you how thankful that we are for you, and that you were willing to do that. And you gave us our beautiful son. And I can never thank you enough. And yeah, it was really beautiful. And my kids got to meet their brother. And that's a whole other story, but they they loved it. And everybody's chatting happily in the back of the car about what an experience that was. And um, yeah, then they fell asleep on the ride home from Topeka. He only had lived an hour away from us his whole life. And then I just broke down and cried the whole rest of the way home, thanking God for having done the impossible and the incredible. And it was like I was living in a dream that I never had, that he had brought something into my life that I had never imagined, thought of, dreamed of. And he was just doing, like that scripture says, exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think, according to the power that works in us. And the only power that was working in me is that I believed in him. I believed in his goodness. So that was the
Yes.
first meeting. I'll try and be a little shorter.
Oh, go ahead. Dive into Abby's story.
uh, Yeah. So we were all very excited by our connection, and we started seeing each other several times a year, and emailing back and forth, of course, and then seeing each other. And it was amazing. And they welcomed me, greatly into their home. And then one day April says, "Our story is so cool. We should be on Oprah." And but I had been looking for, she says, we need to find your daughter. And in fact, I had been searching, and I was on every registry you can get on online, and trying to find her, but had no success. And it was I went on to a couple of jobs, and ultimately I started working in high schools, with a curriculum, being able to talk to kids about sex, decisions, um, how to put yourself in the least pressure situations, all kinds of things, which is amazingly redeeming, to be able to talk to people in a conversation that I would have loved to have had when I was young. And I was so grateful for that. And I loved it. And the kids, I loved them. They loved it. Was just a great, yeah, it was a great 3 years. And then I started working for a life affirming pregnancy center. I became the director of clinic services for a place where women could go when they were pregnant, for free pregnancy tests, free ultrasounds, free information, resources, everything we could do. And I just absolutely loved being able to do that. And again, God's redemption and being able to do that. So one day I'm sitting at my desk and I'm reading through the hundreds of emails I get. And one of them I noticed in the subject line said, birth daughter. And years before, I had written a letter and tried to send it to somebody that I believed might know the parents of my birth daughter, and nothing had happened from that. Well, ultimately, that letter did find its way to her. And I had this letter in front of me from my birth daughter. And I, I just was blown away. And I'd read you a little bit of it if you want me to, but
Yes,
um,
you do.
it's very short. But she said, not sure how to start a letter like this, so I'm sorry if I'm not very well spoken or eloquent. I am your birth daughter, and my name is Abigail, Abby. I just found out 2 weeks ago that you've been looking for me and just received your email address a day. It seems like your search has been long, so I didn't want to sit on this and make you wait any longer than necessary to hear something from me now that I know. I always said that if I could ever say just one thing to my birth mother, it would be thank you. So let me start with that. Thank you for doing the selfless thing. Thank you for doing the hard thing. Thank you for thinking more about me than you did yourself. Thank you for praying for me, and thank you for giving me to a family who would teach me about the Lord and lead me to Him. You gave me my life and gave me my family, and I am so incredibly grateful. I want you to know that what you did for me has defined my whole life. My parents always told me from the time I could understand it all that I was adopted. They had a little book about it that I loved reading, and I used to crawl into their bed at night and ask them to tell me the story of my adoption again. I always thought I was extra special because God had to go to all that extra work just to get me to the right family. I never felt abandoned or sad about it. I always just felt blessed. I know that for you that day 35 years ago was very different than it was for me. I know that you made a huge sacrifice that was very hard on you. And I don't know how you feel about that day and that time, but I can imagine that it was very difficult. And again, all I can say is thank you, which doesn't feel like enough. And she said, I'll stop here for now and hope that I hear back from you. And yeah. So I felt like she told me everything that I could ever have wanted to know as a birth mother in
Yeah.
that one letter, in that few short paragraphs. She knew the Lord. She knew she was loved. She never felt abandoned or sad about her adoption. Actually, she felt extra special because she was adopted, and it affected her life in a profoundly good way. Um, and yeah, and she had a wonderful life, and that was everything that I ever wanted to know. If and so we kind of went from there, and we emailed back and forth for a few months, and many, many, many emails, and getting to know each other, which was amazing. And then I wouldn't have asked, honestly, because I felt like she was good with how we were doing this back and forth. But I had about 5 friends go to heaven that year, 5 people that I knew well. And I was up with a friend who had just been widowed for the second time, and just trying to love on her and pray for her. And I sent off an email to Abby, and I said, I'm perfectly happy to keep just doing what we're doing, but I wondered whether you'd be ever interested in meeting. And I've had people go to heaven this year, and it just makes me know and understand life is short, and whatever you'd want to do, I just wanted to say that I'd be happy to come. And she said yes. And so 5 months after our first email, I got to fly up there with my husband and my daughter Haley. And that's a whole other story, how Haley and Adam reacted, my son. I I'm sorry we didn't even get into that. We're talking about the reunions and stuff, but
It's
I
coming. That's
yes.
that's
So,
the
so at any rate, I did get to meet her. We hugged. I got to meet her little daughter. I was a grandma again through her, and her husband Gene, who is a worship leader, and her parents had been in ministry. And anyway, we got to visit and talk and just see her home. And again, we're at dinner. It's just what people do. And you're like, it was very surreal. And she looked very much like me, very much like me. And it was honestly, I look the most in my family like my mother. And it was almost like looking at a young version of my mom.
Oh,
So it's very surreal sitting across from her, and she was loving and funny and smart. And so was her husband, and just absolutely over the top, beautiful person. And before I left, we got to spend a couple of days. And one of the amazing things I think was I'm at her house, and they invited friends over, and they all, kind of went around in a group and they prayed before the meal. And Jean prayed, and Abby said that I was there and that I had given her life. And this moment was so profound for her that I would be there, the woman who gave her life. And I said, and then I got to pray for them. But I just, again, it was very surreal, so beautiful. And I remembered looking around and thinking, if I had made a different choice, that none of this would be here. None of this beauty, none of this beautiful person, her husband, her daughter, this community that knew and loved them, and they had had a profound effect on. And it just was remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
that is so moving. It's like you were handed a glimpse of redemption woven through every ache. Looking back, what part of the reunion felt like the clearest evidence of God's hand? The kind of thing you couldn't have orchestrated if you tried.
Absolutely. And I have described it like that. It's like seeing the underside of a tapestry until you get to see the other side, and you recognize that God was all the time weaving something far greater and more beautiful than you could ever have imagined. And yeah, I realized, and I hugged her before we left, and a friend of hers snapped a picture and sent it to me. And I thought to myself, it brought back instantly to my mind the day that I left her, when I was holding her uh, over my shoulder and stroking her dark, dark brown hair, and the same picture of me hugging her with this dark, dark hair 35 years later. And I just thought, this is the other side of my faith. This is what was going on the whole time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Incredible, incredible. God is so much greater in his plans and purposes. When it says in Jeremiah 29:11 that I know the plans that I have for you to give you a future and a hope, I it was it was it was far beyond anything. As my husband likes to say, if we would have sat down and tried to write this story, we couldn't have written what God did. It's so far beyond our wildest dreams.
Yeah. Wow. Kirk has been such a good player. He's been such a good sport in this whole story. And that's also a part of what God did.
Yeah.
um, so you and Kirk went on to have two more children, including Adam, my husband. Um, you were mentioning earlier that it was a little difficult for them to sort of adopt all of this as well. How did you deal with that?
Well, um, they okay, so I should probably just say that 2 years or 2.5 years after I had Abby, and I had moved to Colorado out of this, traumatic person doing these things, and I had moved back in the following year, and I actually met my husband, and I continued to run into him over and over again in different places and different times with different people. It was pretty incredible. And we actually married 4.5 months after we had our first date. So we were, again, not. I wasn't great at relationships. I think you can see this, that I really wasn't.
I
I
think you are.
I in the end, it was a good choice because I've been married to him for 43 years now. But neither one of us were as prepared as we should have been or knew each other well enough to be married at 4.5 months. But we fell in love, and it was a whirlwind romance. And I loved his sense of adventure and joy and all of that. And the one area that we didn't connect as much in is the area about God. And he thought it was some more spiritual practice, and I thought it was a relationship. And so it took a long time before we got on the same page with that. But he absolutely, as you say, with regard to the adoptions, was in my corner. He was my hero. He actually spent a lot of money with an investigator trying to find our daughter that, again, took 16 years before we did meet her. And so he was dedicated to it, and he loves and embraces the whole family that grew out of this relationship. But yes, when I told my kids, wildly different reactions. I told my daughter, and she was very mad. Of course, she was 16, 17 years old, and I'm telling her for the first time that she has a brother and a sister out there, and she was not happy. And I just had to explain to her we were not the full disclosure generation, and I never thought that it would be any part of my life. I thought I've got my kids, and one of the things that you'd asked me before about my children was about how that affected me. And I can only say that my children meant everything to me, and I treasured them so greatly. They were absolutely my amazing treasure and a joy for me to have. So, but I told her. She was very mad. She stayed mad for many, many, many months, and just felt like I had deceived her, and I had not sent out to do that at all. I just, again, so I've explained, but I took my son out. Very, very different reaction. I took him out, and we drove in a car. I got him a Coke. I don't know why. And we're sitting there in the car in a parking lot. And I said, I wanted to tell you something. And I told him that I had found his brother. I'd actually broached the topic a little bit, like there was siblings out there, but I told him I found your brother, and he looked at me, and he just kind of got real quiet, and he said, I just want to know. I said, I have a picture of him, and we're looking for your sister. I kind of described the story. He says, I just want to know one thing. And I said, okay. And he says, are you okay? And I just cried, and I said, yeah, I'm okay. My heart's kind of a big ball of something, but yeah, I'm okay. And he said, he said, is that the picture? Because I had it in my hand. And I said, yeah. And he goes, can I have it? And he stuck it in his wallet, and that was that. He had a brother. So wildly different reactions, both different people, both amazing kids. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And as far as the connection since then, wow, it's a whole big story, and I don't know how much time you've got, so I'm just going to let you ask the questions because there was a whole lot that came after that.
Yes, there is. And if you would share just a little bit about, I mean, something that's impacted me very much is that first reunion, like actual physical reunion that we all had at your lake house where everyone
Yeah.
was present. That was such an experience. Maybe just touch on that or another encounter that we've all had, or like a
Yeah.
wedding or something. Just seeing it
Yeah.
all together for you has been really amazing. I know that. So maybe something like that.
Yeah. Well, um, yeah, we after meeting Abby in Winston-Salem, which is where she's from, and I asked her if she'd like to come to Kansas City to meet her brothers, and of course, I would have loved for her to meet all of Kevin's children because over the years now, since the time we met in 2000, he has 4 children, and they're wonderful, beautiful kids. And there's more downline from there. But at that point in time, I just thought, I cannot imagine this sense of overwhelm to meet everybody and try to have conversations with everybody. So she did come to Kansas City, and she met Adam and Haley at my house. And I think we ended up having a glass of champagne or something and all toasted. And it was like instant connection. I know they didn't know each other, but there's something so powerful in our genetics that recognizes one another, I think, and in our hearts too, that recognizes one another and the significance. But they immediately, I'm in the other room getting something for them to snack on or something, and I hear this laughter, this roaring laughter, and the fun that they were having together immediately. And it just was like my heart just was exploding, just completely overwhelmed with thinking. I mean, my thoughts only went as far as meeting her. and then and then it started going to, well, what would the siblings be like to know one another? And since that time, so much has changed in the fact that they do know each other. But we did go to the lake, and we got to all of us meet Kevin and April. His wife met us down here at the lake right now, talking to you. So I say down here. And Adam and you and Haley all went to the lake and just got to have a whole weekend together, which was so special because, just running over to somebody and then leaving would have been horrible. So you got the weekend together, and it was, I sat back as sort of a person who was just in awe of the goodness of God, that he could bring these beautiful, beautiful people together and have them have the camaraderie and instant connections that they did, and the laughter, and even start to take on some of the funny things that families do in a short time came after that, where they'd go, oh, well, that's because you do. And these recognitions of the funny and unique characteristics of each person that they started recognizing and seeing. And I know it's greatly enriched everybody's lives. And I think the the next most significant connection that they made was through what you and Adam chose to do.
What?
Well, maybe you should tell the story of what you guys asked.
I'm surprised. I might have to edit this out, but what?
When you and Adam asked Jean and you FaceTimed.
Oh, to marry us?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Gene was our pastor. He ministered at our wedding, and we instantly connected with him. Adam and him have such a sweet relationship. Gene is just so funny, and he makes loving God easy, and he
Yeah.
helps people really understand how to connect with him, I think. And so we absolutely were only going to have Gene marry us.
Which is incredible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I actually was there, and Adam knew that. I went up to visit them, and you guys FaceTimed and asked him if he would be the minister at your wedding and marry you guys. And he's an ordained minister,
Mhm.
and he said absolutely. And so the pivotal moment, I think, for me, just in taking this all in, was right before your wedding. And I'm standing on the gangplank. You guys got married on a yacht in Newport Beach, and you're going down with Haley with your dress in hand and walking down. And you already had that little meeting on the boardwalk, which was beautiful, and pictures taken. And Adam and I are just standing there, and I'm hugging him, and I'm looking at this beautiful yacht that we're getting ready to go on. And I look up and I see that the name of the yacht is Destiny.
Yeah.
And I knew that was meant for more than just, I mean, I know it was obviously, I believe, because of your and Adam's relationship that you were destined to be. And then for me, as I walked on to that boat and I saw Abby, my birth daughter, and Kevin, my birth son, together, hanging out, laughing and roaring with laughter. And they both looked at me and had this funny little expressions on their face. And I snapped a picture, and I thought, I am walking in a miracle that was destined to be. And it sort of, I don't know, it capsulized this amazing thing that God had done and chosen to do. And since then, many other things in connecting our families. So, yeah, incredible.
What a reward for your selflessness.
Yeah.
Um, I just have a few more questions for you. Kind of want to direct these more towards motherhood and encouragement for the listeners. So, you've had such an impact on my faith and my walk with Christ. Basically, for about 20 years of knowing you, just being a witness to your story alone, but also all the times that you've helped minister to me and guide me, and the community that you have that I get to be connected to. It's just been such a powerful resource for me in this journey. Um,
Hmm.
I want to know, and maybe for your family listening, if they get to, what do you hope we can carry forward from your story?
Yeah. That's a big question.
Mm.
Uh, well, I'll say a couple of things that really, um, and thank you for what you shared. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.
I love you so much, and I'm so thankful for our relationship, and I'm thankful for your open heart. And yeah, I'm so thankful to have you for a daughter.
Oh, love you so much.
And I'll say a couple of things that really made a huge impact in my life. And as you said about my community, one thing that was absolutely pivotal in my life was to have good friends, and not handfuls and handfuls of good friends. Some people do, but very deeply important and treasured friends that loved God, were committed in understanding how great his love was, and just to walking out their purpose. And that to me helped me so much. As I said, Kirk was not very interested in spiritual things in the early part of our relationship. And there was just too much to motherhood and life and all the things that that brings, and the challenges of a marriage without having God in the middle necessarily of somebody else's heart and life. And so having those friendships, they not only ministered to me and helped me ground in this reality of God in our lives and being a part of his family, and him being the father and the leader, and he's going to show us the way through and got these great plans for us. How do we walk these out? How do we continue to develop these designed gifts that we've got inside of us? And having those treasured friendships were absolutely life altering for me. And I would not be the person that I am today without them. They stretched me, they challenged me. I was thankful for that. I got to go on many missions trips, and I went through Bible college. I graduated. I have, gotten to serve in the ministry and women's ministry for 20 years, and in many other capacities, and just going to foreign country. I'm just grateful for those experiences and that. So I would think that part of that is not being consumed with myself. That was a huge factor in restoring my heart, because I don't think I could get restored by navel gazing
Mhm.
and by thinking about myself, but through looking at him and taking my eyes off myself and looking at him, and loving on other people, wanting to see them transformed and restored and uplifted and, helped. Um, that restored my own soul too, and really brought about a level of wholeness that I wouldn't have had otherwise, if I wouldn't have been just serving and trying to care about other people. Um, and so I believed for my children to walk in the design that God gave them, and in developing it to its fullest potential and just living out what impact will happen through that. And I get excited about that, and I've prayed for them. And all I know is I'm not the one who makes things happen. I believe God really helped me one day in giving me an insight that really helped me, because I'm a little analytical and I can be a little serious. And I and I remember him saying, "Okay, I This is what the impression I'm getting, that I'm hearing him say, is that I'm the God of the how. How things will happen is up to me. And that's my part. And your part is to have faith, believe in me. And you can't do my part, and I can't do your part.
Mm.
And that clarified for me so greatly that I have to let go. I have to let go of how are you going to do that, God? What do, what about this that my kid's doing and that I concern about? I mean, you can have concern, but I learned to take my concerns to the Lord, and I actually felt a power in handing that over to Him. It's not a passive move. Prayer is not passive. And belief in Him is not passive, it's very active. It's a very active relationship for me to know that if I hand over my concern over my child, or the thought or the dream or the desire, and I actually put it in His hands, and I say, God, I know that you are going to. You love him more than I do. You love my daughter more than I do. You love my kids more than I do. Thank you that you're going to take care of those things. And I pray into them specifically, but He's the one who's going to figure out the how, and He's going to come up with the way and the truth that they need. And my job is not to be Him to them. My job is to be like a farmer who, when I feel moved to plant a seed about something, I do, and I say something or I do something, and then I let that take its whatever place that it will, if they'll receive. And so I look at it like that. I'm not the manager of their life. I don't take full responsibility. And that's helped me a lot, because it's kind of scary loving kids as much as I do, and letting them make their mistakes and letting them do their things. Of course you give guidance, and it's all different at different levels. My kids are well grown now, and so they're very much in God's hands, but I have a part to play. So you don't advocate your part. You don't say, well, God's got it. No, what's your part? And so daily I'm praying and asking, okay, so you just tell me, and whatever part He asks me to play, dropping a seed, doing something, whatever it is, or just being quiet. I do that. I try to do that. I try to listen. I'm so far imperfect about it, but God's a good God, and He keeps helping me with that.
So,
So
just to summarize with some bold words there. So, it seems like you're saying it requires participation, obedience, surrender. And then also, you're kind of highlighting that your relationship with God is somewhat like He's a father to you who like allows you to have your own autonomy, but is there not as a like correction necessarily, but as a guide along that path that you're on. So, not that He's punishing you necessarily with pain, but that He's there supportive. Is that kind of what you're saying?
absolutely,
Yeah.
He never punishes. He really lets the Word correct us,
Mm.
and the Word does do that. As you read it, your roots go down deeper. You understand more. One more layers peeled off of your understanding, and so that's what He uses. But He'll use all of your even mistakes and all the pain and all the trauma and all the things in your life. Yes, it's very much of a partnership, because it's like a fish that's out of water. If we live according to our five senses, um, we we can do okay, and some people more than others, but we will not be in the thriving, vital, dynamic walk, adventure, excitement that we would be in partnership with God, who is the one who knows all things. And so I can only know so much in my finite mind. So I draw from His wisdom. I look at it like having gotten a treasure chest. Galatians 5:22 says that we have the fruit of the Spirit. That's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are actually deposited in us when we receive Him into our heart, when we receive and believe in Him. And those things are all something I draw on. And I look at it like a well that I can just draw on whatever I need for whatever I go through or whatever situation is required. So I'm never alone, and I always have resource. The deepest resource, the greatest wisdom is his. So I just try to draw from that. Yeah.
Hey, I think I just have a couple more questions. So, this one is going to speak directly to any women listening who might be having a similar journey that you've had or some complications in their story where they're not sure where to turn. So, to those women listening right now who feel like they've messed up too much or that it's too late for God to redeem their story, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd say I know how you feel. And and um but the good news for me was that God is beyond my feelings. The reality of him and what he's promised. He's demonstrated his love. He's not words on a page. He's demonstrated his love in what he created the earth to be. Got back to my snowflake story. I recognized the beauty of what he had made and the great design and the provision and the gift of it and the beauty of it that just was for nothing but to minister to our hearts and to show him how surrounded we are by his love. That's how I look at nature. It's his demonstration. I like to say the earth was my first love letter from God. And after that, he demonstrated his love in dying on a cross so that he could bridge the gap from humanity's sin and to his own spiritual realm, which has no sin. And Jesus came in that form of God and mankind and won us back.
Mhm.
And that is a great demonstration. So when um, I'll put it like this, because emotions will tell you other things and people will tell you other things. My dad was telling me other things, um, life will tell you other things. But the truth is the truth. And when Abby wrote in her letter that I would lay in my parents' bed at night and say, "Tell me the story of my adoption again." I feel like what I have chosen to do and what you are able to do is tell yourself the story again, that you are so beloved and you are adopted into his family. And adoption has a unique nature. The Bible says we are adopted into his family and that we have received adoption as sons when we believe in him. And so when the lies and the other things want to tell me something different, I tell myself the story of my adoption again. Look at how beloved that I am. That I have been granted the right to become a child of God, and I am made new in him, and I'm just being transformed every time I renew my mind to his word and I read his word. It I'm changing and I'm transforming more into what he sees, who he sees me to be, and I'm seeing him more for who he is. The Bible really reveals the love of God to me. And so I tell myself the story of my adoption again when my emotions tell me it's not going to happen. I know that he's greater than that. And even my own self perceptions, he's greater than those. And those are the ones I had to fight the most, just probably my self perceptions of my own lack of value and worth. And he showed me so how great my worth actually is to him.
Mm. So, Lise, I just wanted to open it up for you. If there's anything you'd want us to know or a place we could follow you, something that you're working on, anything burning on your heart from the Lord, go ahead and just share that now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I believe that I'm writing a story. I'm writing our story up, and I am writing a book, and so I'm excited about it because I just know it showcases the goodness of God coming through in any of the darkest seasons, the hardest things in our life, that God will bring through something far greater than what we could have imagined if we just continue to trust Him, even in the wait. It's an active place. Waiting is actively doing good to others, doing just looking at him, trusting him, learning more about him, and walking out that trust is just a daily thing. And so some things that he shows me about that. Um, and so I'm grateful, so grateful about that. So I'm writing a book, and I believe the title right now that I've going to be Tell Me the Story of My Adoption
Oh,
Again. And the reason is for part of what I already shared, but also in learning just the way that God has really even, I mean, I've known him now since I was 19 years old. And so it's many, many years now, and I'm still getting to know him better. And the kind of it's like a father that didn't answer all the questions when you were young. We didn't know to ask them. We didn't know all the questions that we would ask of a father. And I found out many things about my father way, way into my life, that made me love and appreciate my father so much, even more than I did. Even when we were in our hardship, I loved him. And I found out truly he was a great man in many, many ways. It's the same way with God, our Father. There's no end to the depth, the excitement, the fun, the thrill of knowing Him and what He wants to do in our lives. And I think the other thing that you asked me about any burning thing in my heart, I think the thing that I learned too was that I could give to other people and I could love on them and care for them, but receiving love was harder for me. And I recognized that it was that performance based love that had nurtured in me from not being loved well when I was young and through the relationships that I'd had and being by myself in those pregnancies, that I felt comfortable in, oh, you want to love people, you want to love God, He's so good. And I thought so much was about my love for God and maybe what was required of me. And the truth is, that what God kept trying to say was, would you allow me to love you? And I think that's that testing ground where in life with people, it may last and it may not. And it may be there for you, it may not, It may be hot or cold at times. And with God, it never is. It's always on. It's always for you. And I didn't feel truly safe in his love until my mid 30s when I really understood
mm,
that, that it was more about keeping my eyes on him and allowing his words of love, his affirmation, those stories of redemption, that a story of adoption and affirmation come to me. And First John actually says that. It says, we love him because he first
mm.
loved us. And when you're always putting the onus on yourself to be the one who loves, it's backwards. It's allowing him to love you for who you are, truly beautiful to him, truly designed and unique, and of such great value and to him that I started really coming alive in my life in a big way, and his love started really permeating so many areas of my life. So yeah, that's been on my
That's
heart
beautiful.
to talk about.
All right, well, we'll be looking for your book.
Thank
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm really excited to read it.
you.
And I hope it
You're in
has
it.
a way to minister to any heart that is looking for God.
Yeah, I agree. I might
Mhm.
say one more thing in that I have I really have a heart for people who've had abortions. And I know that that choice, I mentioned it earlier, that people have found themselves there. And I, I wanted to make sure that people understood that my story is my story. It's what I chose. It's what I did. But I know that other people have stories that's full of also pain and suffering and a need for redemption and just mercy, forgiveness, all the things that we need, and that God is right there to do that. He is the same loving Father. There is nothing that we could ever do that is farther than His love. There is no darkness so dark that his love and his light is not greater than those choices, those mistakes, those things. And so, yeah, again, I feel like telling yourself the story of your adoption from him is it's so life-giving in those times and for those reasons. And that you have a child in heaven, or maybe more than one, that he's taking good care of for you.
That's really beautiful. I'm just in awe of your obedience. Before we wrap up, would you be willing to pray over those listening, especially anyone walking through a tender territory of adoption, whether they're a birth mom or an adoptive parent or an adoptee seeking peace and belonging? However you feel led, would you bless them with a prayer?
Yes, I'd love to. Well, thank you, Jesus, for every person listening to this podcast, that they were drawn here, I believe, by your Spirit. And so many times when we're even unaware of how you bring things across our path, when you're trying to do something in us, Lord, that you find a way to draw us in to that good thing that you've got planned. And so I pray, Father, for each one that you are illuminating the height and the depth and the breadth of your love, Father, to them, and that they would know your goodness and trust in your goodness, even when they can't see it, Lord. They would believe beyond their eyes, believe beyond their five senses. And God, that's all you're looking for. You're not looking for perfection, qualification, anything else. Lord, you are simply looking for the person that would trust you. And I thank you that that is what has brought about every good thing in my life, is just trusting in your goodness. And you're no respecter of persons, Father. I know that for every person listening, that if they just lean not, like the word says, to their own understanding, but in all their ways acknowledge you, you will direct their path. Thank you, God, for doing that. And God bless Angelina for her obedience in doing this podcast and illuminating your goodness through her story and other people's. Amen.
Amen. Whew. Thank you so much.
You're
I know
so
it's going to
welcome.
bless so many.
Good.
Lise, thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's no small thing to open up the places that once felt tender and now shine with testimony. So, to those listening, maybe you've walked through a surrender that no one else sees. Maybe you've questioned whether God could redeem what's been broken or lost. This story is proof He can, He does, He is. Thank you for joining us on the whole way home. We'll see you next time for another step toward the heart of God and the truth that sets us free. Amen.
Amen.